So a while back, there was a lot of pearl clutching when anybody mentioned the alt bop house, which was a creator house filled with young adult women who seemed like they were using surface level alternative styles for male sexual validation. A lot of people were using the phrase "you can't be alternative and a sex worker" because they assumed that all alternative subcultures are against sex work, since it can be very oppressive and exploitive. But that belief isn't fully reflected across every alternative subculture. Alternative communities are generally sex positive, but their attitudes towards sex work specifically are extremely mixed and context dependent. Most local alt scenes, especially in low-income areas, are very protective of alternative women who had to go into sex work offline, since many alt people know firsthand how exploitive the sex industry can be. So they try to treat sex workers, who are mostly women, with care and respect, and engage with them on a human level, since they're also interacting with these women in alt spaces when they're off the clock. When it comes to online spaces, alternative people see possibly basic women performing sexualized versions of the e-girl and goth aesthetic, often outside of alt spaces and without engaging in any of the music, fashion, aesthetics, or political aspects of the subculture. They can't really humanize these women who are just constantly posting sexualized ads for themselves with normie music, especially since the alt style in question doesn't really seem that individualized. People still continuously call the alt bop house posers because they're basically just the dark mode version of every unspecial bop house. They once posted a video laughing at the idea of everyone calling them posers because we don't actually know what their political stances are or what kind of music they actually listen to. But that's a bit confusing though, since it's pretty easy to let people know what kind of music and politics you're into, especially online. Even if they didn't want to focus their interests in videos, they could very easily put their Spotify or fundraisers they support in their link tree, but they don't. So we don't know the reasons why they don't do those things besides the plausible conclusion of them being actually posers. But I also have another hypothesis that their choices of what they choose to share is directly related to their online work. I very obviously dress e-girl-ish, but that combined with my East Asianness, I was very heavily sexualized. So when I'd start talking about drama, politics, music, anime, manga, or even bring up hypotheticals I randomly think about, people in real life were less eager to interact with me, and would often seem disappointed or lose interest entirely. It seemed as though they had this predetermined idea of what an East Asian e-girl should be like, and when I actually expressed my opinions and thoughts like a real person, it didn't match their fantasy. So when I see these alt bop house girls getting criticized for not showing their real personalities or political views on their business accounts, I understand why they may not. The audience that's paying them probably doesn't want to hear their actual thoughts, because the people who pay their bills want the fantasy version. That's just what a performer has to do when they're performing. They have to perform. If they do actually have alternative music taste and alternative politics and express those thoughts and opinions to their audience, they get to be authentic to their fellow alternative people, but they also risk their income, since the people who most commonly like alternative femmes the most are conservative basic men who are attracted to the taboo aesthetics but are usually completely turned off by the actual rebellious personality or even an actual unconventional appearance. That said, it still doesn't disprove people calling them posers. Just because they have reasons to do what they do doesn't mean it's actually justified to sexualize a subculture that's already very heavily fetishized by the people who respect them least. But as they said, we also don't know these women personally. They could be perfectly authentic to themselves, and even if they stop doing OF, their styles are still very cool and attractive, so they'd most likely keep them. But the actual problem that I assume people have is the compiled effect of highly visible sexualized alt content drowning out other representations, which reinforces the idea that all alt women exist primarily for male consumption. So we've pointed out the problem, right? These women are not individually the problem, it's that they're using the buzzword of alternative to make them stand out against other basic OF creators. So let's start focusing on that instead of saying that their makeup, clothes, tattoos, and hair are all cheap, unethical, and all from Shein. It's very audacious to call someone a poser based purely on how they look, because we don't actually know them, how they got their clothes, their interests, or what they'd wear if cameras weren't involved. I think critique towards the sex work industry and its creators by extension, in a feminist viewpoint that isn't just sex bad, or even OnlyFans specifically because the owner of the company sends millions to Israel, can be done in good faith, but I just think it's very unproductive to assume that these women are posers just because they're sex workers on TikTok. It would be more alternative to keep in mind that the people who go into this line of work tend to do so because they feel like they need to in more ways than just financial security, and also to remember that alternative communities were meant to be an alternative to a very conservative society that relied on purity and shame. I saw that another goth woman was very upset about the bop house, since she believes that alternative subcultures shouldn't be sexualized at all, and she ends it out with women like them are the reason why other women have to struggle with weirdos so often. But that's victim blaming language. Other women don't have to deal with weirdos because women like this capitalize off of them. Other women have to deal with weirdos because weirdos don't don't know what consent is. There are women out there who could match their freak if the weirdos wanted, but weirdos end up bothering the women who don't want anything to do with them, and that's not the fault of women who could match their freak. I find it so ironic that she says that she doesn't want her culture to be fetishized or sexualized while wearing a choker and a corset, a constricting clothing object that was made to shape the human body to be ideally more erotic, and a kink accessory which is associated with fetishes. Two things that have roots in sexualization, but those things were reclaimed by alternative people to represent empowerment and rebellion. The few sex workers who actually consciously choose to do what they do feel empowered and rebellious because of what they do as their job. I still think the feeling is a bit too optimistic, since a work industry monopolized by the evilest men on the planet is a lot more complicated to reclaim than a clothing item, but my point is that alternative people should not have purity-based reasoning inside a subculture that was supposed to reject purity culture altogether. I've seen another so-called goth guy rant about how alternative women are ruining the scene. He posted a clip of some girl dancing all cute in her room and complained that she adds nothing to the gothic movement and only attracts gooners. Gooners? You don't mean like the demographic of people that would go to Kinkfest, show their breasts off, and dance in the room in a sexy way? Since when is that not goth? Her dancing might be a little weird, but she's also just dancing as an alternative person. Why must goth women dance and act in a way that caters to how an insecure man thinks a goth woman should act? He complains about how goth women are just getting online to dance in the room for the approval of others, but he also posts online. There are a lot of different reasons why people post online, but the fact that they just want the validation is the first one that popped up. I'm afraid that someone's projecting. He's so annoyed that the only goth women he ever sees are the ones that seem like they're only goth for male attention, which isn't true in the slightest anyway, but he also seems to only ever interact with the content that has alternative women sexualizing themselves. I get goth content on my feed all the time, but I get political rants, makeup advice, fashion advice, music recommendations, and art from goth artists. Why is this goth guy only ever getting women dancing? Seems more like a you problem than their problem. The last thing the scene needs is some insecure goth Andrew Tate with a history of physically and financially abusing goth women for years to try to berate sexy goth women about what they contribute to the community. I know that a lot of people like to get defensive about whatever group label they feel proud to be a part of, and sometimes for good reason, because despite what it might seem like online, people who pretend to be goth or emo as a hilarious joke are still alive and well apparently, but sometimes that's not the case, and the alternative people looking from the outside in tend to get insecure about the fact that they feel like they don't belong, so they lash out at those who look too much, not enough, or simply different, because it's easier to accuse someone of being a poser or performative than to confront the possibility of imposter syndrome. Of course, it's not always just that, since I think a lot of people don't really assume that it's just friendly fire, but rather a sort of wolf in sheep's clothing thing. I've seen the phrase pretty girl humor being thrown around a lot lately. At first, the phrase used to be meant for women who are pretty and popular all their lives, to the point where they didn't have to develop a sense of humor or be entertaining to be liked. I personally don't like this phrase because my mom said something similar to this when I was upset about the phenomenon of people disliking me when they get to know me, but they'd stick around anyways for the chance to crack because I, for some reason, attract Asian fetishizers in real life, and she responded to that by saying that it's probably because I have no personality and the only good thing about me is my face and body. I thought it was funny, but it also low-key hurt my feelings because she wasn't joking, like, at all. But hey, at least she called me pretty. I know it's not nearly the same, but that's just what flashbacks to me whenever people use the phrase pretty girl humor. I know it's supposed to be about punching up or something, but it's such a loaded phrase that's very heavily based on if you know everything about this person, and chances are you don't, no matter how close you think you are to that person. You are just calling someone unfunny and pretending that you're the good person in this scenario because at least you called them pretty. I saw this video that was ranking pretty girl humor moments, and one of the higher ranked videos is a video making fun of one part of a longer video with Sydney Sweeney, but they put the original Sydney Sweeney video she was making fun of on a lower tier, which just proves to me that these people are just assuming things about people that most of the time aren't true. I can always get on board with people making fun of Sydney Sweeney, but that's because she's a white supremacist, not because she's an unfunny, conventionally attractive woman. If you can't tell the difference between someone being harmless and silly and a racist, I need all of us to take a step back and reflect. I know that this trend was mostly conjured up by people who were made fun of by the pretty popular girls, but these people are not defending themselves and fighting back from the people who harmed them. They are making fun of strangers for what they find funny and what they find interesting. So literally repeating the cycle of bullying that made covering your mouth while laughing a trait that most people have, whether you're a good person or bad person, triggering to these people. The most recent and common thing that was called pretty girl humor was when a lot of girls girls were dressing up as the Lorax for Halloween. I know that people are allowed to complain about whatever they want because sure, the world will keep spinning if a few girls get their feelings hurt for wearing a costume, but the world will also keep spinning if the people complaining about the Lorax costume's feelings get hurt. I just don't understand why when mainly men continuously reuse jokes on the internet, it's just internet humor, but when mainly women reuse jokes on the internet, it's overused and insensitive because the main plot from the Lorax was about overconsumption and all these stupid girls are over-consuming on Halloween. Even though the lesson was about caring about the environment and how big companies are the main contributors to that problem, not over-consumption committed by teenage girls. I mean, it's still great to care about over-consumption, especially since it makes me feel better about the fact that I can't afford to over-consume anyways, but I'm also not gonna get on specifically women's dicks about how buying one costume is gonna keep us trapped within a capitalist society. I'm forever upset about how everyone missed the whole point of the Lorax movie and turned it into pretty people humor. Were you also forever upset in 2012 when every person online missed the point of the movie and made it all about Onceler's self-cess? Personally, I thought it was funny, but maybe that's just pretty girl humor again. I also think the costume of the Lorax being overused was purely an online thing because I didn't see any Lorax costumes when I went out on Halloween nights, but I did see a lot of corsets with some pair of animal ears, so honestly, at least these pretty popular girls are trying to get into the Halloween spirit. I even saw so many comments of possibly weird girls and outcasts saying that they wanted to be the Lorax for Halloween, but they saw that everybody fucking hated it online, so they just didn't dress up this year. Oh my god, it's almost like when you tried to insult a problematic person by mocking an unproblematic thing they're doing, you actually end up insulting everyone else who does that unproblematic thing. A similar trend popped up with people making fun of performative weird girls on TikTok. And at first it was harmless and had good intentions because it was supposed to call out adult women who bullied outcasts in high school for the things they liked, but now the things that were considered weird in high school are considered cool and trendy now. But if you can't tell where I'm going with this, the trend just judges people for things that they couldn't possibly know. This female creator is such a performative weird girl. She's actually a popular girl and she just pretends to be weird. Be passionate about anything else, please. If said girl in question is not being a bigot or a bully, then why do we care if said girl is well liked at school? If said girl in question is really cringy without being an incel, then why do we care if said girl is conventionally attractive? If said girl in question is not putting down other girls in any sense, then why do we care if said girl gets positive attention from boys? I saw this video that said, I can tell when your weird girl aesthetic doesn't come from the heart, it's performative. And I'll give this creator a small pass since based on the comments she's liking, it's pretty obvious that she's talking about the behavior of the so-called weird girls, like if they claim to be weird but they hate on anime fans, furries, alternative people, but even that can become a pretty slippery slope since whenever I see weird girls throw some friendly fire, it tends to be due to their own insecurity about not being weird enough and not because they're performative. Like one time I saw this girl make fun of some guy's piercings because she didn't like how they looked, but in her profile pic she looks alternative. And as I said before, if you're alternative, you're supposed to understand why people would like an unconventional look. She could be a performative weird girl, but I also don't know her well enough to make that kind of judgment because who knows? Maybe her evil ex had similar piercings, so she's projecting her hatred for that style onto him. Maybe she's projecting her own mental inability to dress or look a way that other people would say is ugly. Maybe piercings killed her mom, so her coping mechanism is to insult other people's piercings. Or maybe the girl in her profile pic isn't even the person behind the comment and they're using the pic ironically to make fun of her. There are so many reasons why alternative people are mean, but it bothers me most when all people try to take the higher moral ground about it though. I saw this video that said fully convinced actual weird girls are an extinct species now. I don't want to hear about your niche obsession with metal bands and Hello Kitty. Show me your unusual closet and cartoon themed kitchen. Show me your hidden folder on your iPhone and let it be filled with a single celebrity crush. Tired of these performative weird girls ex-cheerleaders. Her caption also says, I love weird girls in all caps. Actually, no you don't. You like girls that fit into your very specific definition of interesting. Someone who loves weird girls wouldn't put weird girls against each other in a hierarchy to rank who's weird enough and who's not. Even her own criteria is so strange because why is a cartoon themed kitchen more weird than liking metal bands? And why is having the modern equivalent of a locked diary of a celebrity crush considered weird when it was one of the most common things to do as a teenage girl, especially in the 2000s? If you're bored of hearing people talk about metal bands and Hello Kitty, then you just simply don't find those things interesting. And that's fine. Nothing will happen to the weird girl community if most people like those things, but it doesn't make them performative or make those things basic just because a lot of alternative people like them. And I would think that she would know that, considering that she also has a very mainstream fashion style. Maybe she wears the same clothes as every other TikTok alt girl because they look cool and you want to look cool too, because there's nothing wrong with being exactly like other girls. I hate that she ends this by insinuating that ex-cheerleaders can't grow as people and get into different things because of a sport they did once upon a time, which also happens to police how women self-express based on their perceived social status. Congratulations, you're doing the exact same things that toxic cheerleaders do. As much as I love watching everybody revisit the footage they have of themselves back in 2020, I also find it annoying that people feel like they have to do that to be considered authentic, especially since, in all honesty, being weird in 2020 was also the mainstream thing to do, so it's also not helping your case. It's hilarious that whenever I come across the Weird Girl Olympics and the comments are just saying things like "I know ball" while showing off their Danganronpa cosplays and acting like Homestuck and Kinning is niche. If somebody wanted to genuinely become alternative or wanted to indulge in weird interests without insulting or belittling others for their weird interests and styles, I don't think that we should give a shit if they were popular in high school or even popular now. Again, I know that there are annoying, mean people who dress up as alternative or pretend to be weird out of mockery or performance, and in those cases, make fun of them all you want. But most of the time, we're talking about hypothetical girls that have stereotypical interests, and that's bad because those girls think those stereotypical interests are interesting. At least when men were being called performative, the men who dressed traditionally masculine or even just basic weren't called out. But it just seems like women are accused of performing no matter what they do, because there's no version of being a woman that escapes scrutiny. If you're an alternative girl that wants to reclaim her sexuality by capitalizing off of it, you're a poser. If you're a goth girl that likes to dance, you're single-handedly ruining goth culture. If you're a basic, popular, pretty girl, you're mean and unfunny. If you like dressing up for Halloween, you're an overconsumer. If you're a girl with certain interests, you're boring and performative. If we're judging alternative, weird, funny girls, I need all of us to start being a little bit woker, because I cannot stand the constant movement of the goalpost when it comes to authentic self-expression, but I don't know, that's just me. Laters.